Hi guys, welcome back. So basically now I'm going to explain to you how do we use a subnet and assign IP addresses on the network. Basically, if we are going to use a class C address, I can choose any address starting with 192.168. Remember, the network that I am going to use depends on this number. For example, I am going to use 100.0. My usable IP addresses will be 192.168.100.1 to 192.168.100.254. These are the usable IP addresses. This means that those IP addresses, I have 254 IP addresses that I can assign to any host on the network. Basically, each host on the network, this will be the same. The only thing that will change will be the last digit because it starts with 1 to 254. Now, the subnet mask for a class C is 255.255.255.0. When the subnet mask is 0 here, it means that this number, the network was 194.168.100.0. There's this number that basically that can change from 1 to 254. So basically now I am going to explain to you how do we assign those IP addresses on devices on the network. Remember that I have my switch here. My switch, for example, has 8 ports. I have my first host. That's my first host. That's my second host. That's my third host. Okay. Now, for example, I have 3 hosts. This is host A, host B, and host C. I want host A to communicate with any host, host B to communicate with any host, and similarly host C to communicate with host A and host B. So basically, on each host on a network, we have to input 3 important things. The first one is IP address. On each host, you need to input its IP address. The second thing is subnet mask. The third thing is default gateway. We have another thing which is called the DNS IP as well. We have IP address, subnet mask, default gateway, DNS. Each host needs to have the following network configuration. Let me explain to you. The IP address needs to be unique on each host. The subnet mask will be the same because it is in the same network. It's basically 255.255.255.0. If I am going to use a switch and I want host A to communicate with host B, basically I won't need the default gateway for the time being and the DNS IP for the time being. Now, my network that I'm going to use, for example, is 192.168.100.0. That's my network. And my usable IP address is 192.168.100.1 to 192.168.100.254. Now I will need to assign IP address to all those hosts. Okay. For example, to host A, I won't start with the first one. I will explain to you later why I will not start with the first one, because I will reserve the .1 for the default gateway. I will use the 192.168.100, for example, .100. That's my IP for host A. My subnet mask for host A, 255.255.255. 192.168.0. I will assign another IP address for host B. It's 192.168.100.101. The subnet mask will be the same, 255.255.255.0. For the third host, I will assign another IP address, 192.168.100.102, and my subnet mask will be 255.255.255.0. Okay? So basically my host A has IP address .100, my host B has IP address .101, and my host C has IP address .102. Remember that I can't put the same IP address on two hosts on a network, else I will get what I call as IP conflict. If there's IP conflict on a network, both hosts might lose connection, or one of the hosts might work while the other does not work. So each host needs to have a unique IP address. Now basically with only those two information, host A can communicate with host B, host A can communicate with host C, host C can communicate with host B and A, and host B can communicate with host A and C. Now for example, I want host A to go and communicate with the internet. I mean, I want to load pages, web pages on host A. I can't just assign host A the IP address and the subnet mask. There's another very important thing that I will need to assign now, which is called the default gateway. Basically, the default gateway is a small router that I had mentioned in my previous video. The default gateway has ports and a smaller port for the phone line. The phone line goes to the and connects to the internet. Okay. From one of the ports of the switch, I will take a LAN cable. What type of cable is this? Now you should know that this cable is a straight through cable. This is a LAN cable as well. This is a LAN cable. This is a LAN cable. Now, for example, this host wants to communicate over the internet. There is a server here which is hosting a website, and that website is www.yahoo.com. The website is www.yahoo.com. Now, if we don't have a default gateway, there is no way that this host can communicate with the outside world. What is the default gateway? The default gateway is basically your router. Your router, what you need to understand, needs to have an IP address. There is an internal interface here of your router, and normally the IP address that starts with 1, you assign that IP address here, 192.168.100.1, and the subnet mask of this router is 255.255.255.0. Okay, so basically, if that host now wants to go to the internet, it needs to communicate with the default gateway. Now, I will assign another IP address. In my next video, I will show you how to assign those IP addresses. I have my IP address, I have my subnet mask. Now my default gateway will become the IP address of the router. It's basically 192.168.100.1. This as well will have the default gateway, the same default gateway, 192.168.100.1. This host as well will have the default gateway, 192.168.100.1. Now, for example, if this host wants to go to www.yahoo.com, you open a web browser and go to yahoo.com. This host will contact the default gateway from the switch here. He will say, hey, can you take me to yahoo.com? And then this